For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning. Basically, things fairly mixed as far as Asia Pacific is concerned, although it has to be said that the banking concerns are lessening as the days go past. The big news out of Asia Pacific is the Australian stock market, the ASX, which actually got to a 2-year high. Hong Kong up 0.6% this morning. China's new premier, Li Qiang, is trying to rally Asia behind Beijing. He's touting China as being what he describes as a centerpiece. We're approaching the center. One of the central crossroads of history, and China is the center of stability in that. He's talking to a gathering of Asian leaders. That's the message from China. China will also, according to the CEO of Fortescue, which is one of Australia's largest iron ore companies, it will take an extraordinary amount of iron ore from the rest of the world. 2008 claim, the CEO of Fortescue said that, and Asia, he's speaking to the Asian equivalent of Davos, which is called BOAO, and he says that commodities will rise as a result of Chinese demand. Saudi is actually strengthening its ties with China. It's agreed to join the China Security Bloc, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and Saudi. That's an important move, really. It'll join Russia, India, Pakistan, Qatar, and Turkey in that. Saudi doesn't have full membership of this yet, but it is pivoting Saudi eastwards, as opposed to from the Middle East, but now pivoting eastwards. India population, here's an interesting observation. It is very likely that 1 in 5 jobs, working people, will be in India in 2047. That means that India is vying with China to have the largest population in the world. But India, remember, will be ahead, or would be ahead, as far as we can tell right now, because it'll have a younger population. Younger means working population. So that's an interesting one to follow over the coming years. As far as the United States is concerned, let's recap what's going on there. Stock futures, little change today. It's been a fairly hectic week so far. Today, we'll be looking at the jobless claims and also the GDP figures out of the United States. The Alibaba split, that thing I was talking about yesterday, split into 6 business sections, has boosted the feeling about tech stocks, and in particular, because Alibaba owns 30% of Ant, which operates Alipay, that's felt to be a rather interesting tech market move. Meta bosses, there it is finally, Meta bosses are looking at political ads which are going to come up against regulators in Europe and the UK. What those political ads will actually be, they're not quite sure of at the moment. But they're waiting for EU regulation. They think it'll be fairly fierce, and Mark Zuckerberg and the rest of them are actually looking at that to work out what this regulation will actually mean for them. UK and the EU, after the Northern Ireland, the Windsor Agreement appears to have worked. They're now looking for some kind of cooperation on carbon border tax. There could be a levy on imported goods which are felt to be high in carbon. Grant Shapps is the energy minister in the UK. He's been promoting this. We're going to get more details of that today. But one of the things that both the EU and the UK are against are US subsidies for energy, which is felt will skew the market and tilt what has up till now been a relatively level playing field. The UK is also being seen as objecting to the payment it needs to get in to the Horizon Security cooperation, which the EU are planning right now. It's going to cost 95 billion euros in total. UK's up for £15 billion, but as a late member of it, given that the Windsor Agreement has just been more or less concluded, it feels it shouldn't pay as much. That's a continuing story. And the UK, once again, in the cross of something called the Resolution Foundation, a sort of left-wing think tank that is saying that government investment in housing and health services has made the UK very much poorer. It spends 2.5% of its GDP on infrastructure. The OECD average and the developing country average is 3.7%. Finally, oil declining slightly on falling diesel demand in the US. We're looking at WTI about $72 a barrel, Brent down to about 77.9. As far as gold's concerned, it was testing that level of 2,000. It hasn't actually sustained that. I didn't think it would. A strengthening dollar is keeping the price of gold down, but it's now looking at about 1950 as being its sort of ceiling. That's the global view this morning.
All right. Yes. At first, this conundrum about political ads. Largely, do you think the social media companies like Meta will have to ditch it once and for all? Because when you look at it, it just makes about 1% of their revenue during peak campaign season. So it's not a real big dent on their record books. That's number one. And number two will be about the banking system in the world in general. It looks like there's a little lull in the banking system and there's a level of uncertainty. Is this like the quiet before the crisis to happen?
As far as the social media sites are concerned, I don't think it matters how much revenue actually comes to them. What appears on them is the most visible part of it, and this is clearly what they're worried about. They don't quite understand, and presumably they're asking for guidance from the EU, what the regulators mean by political content. I mean, does that apply to all advertising? Can all advertising be seen as political? Maybe not if it's directed towards single commercial groups like washing powder and so on, but maybe there are wider issues. This is what they are debating at the moment. And it's clear that social media now is having to grow up and get into the grown-up world of what one can actually do with freedom of speech. That is what they're grappling with at the moment, and they need more guidance from the EU. As far as the banking crisis is concerned, when has there ever not been uncertainty about banks throughout the world? I think there is now. I don't necessarily. There might be a storm coming. There might not be a storm coming. I don't know. I think what we're seeing is some of the regional banks in the United States found rising interest rates difficult to deal with all the reasons that we've gone into many, many times on this program before. But the major banking system, I think at the moment, looks relatively safe, but I can only go on what one is actually told. But if I were you, I'd be looking at what interest rates, rising interest rates, which the banking sector is having to contend with, probably means for each individual bank. It means paying out to more savers, and the savers are saying that the lending rates go up, but the saving rates tend to be a lot slower. So I think the banks have got a lot to think about. A gathering storm, I really don't know. I don't think anybody else does.
Okay, well, in the US is seeking to ban Binance, the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange, because according to the authorities, Binance has been operating illegally in the United States. But there's also this story about Binance hiding its operations since 2017 in China. So what exactly is the problem? Is China the problem, or corruption is the problem, or the fact that Binance is sidestepping regulations? That's one. Number two, Alibaba, the shares improved after yesterday's story, about the company being split into 6 agencies. Is this an indication, perhaps, that the Chinese authorities are trying to soften their stance with regard to the regulation of the tech agencies? And finally, I wanted to ask you about Elon Musk and others, 1,000 others, who have issued a letter saying, look, we should slow down with artificial intelligence, the deluge of non-human minds, likely to pose a threat to society. They've asked for 6 months of slowing down, but really, what do you think? Artificial intelligence, is it a threat, not just to society, but the future of life, the whole of humanity?
Wow, that's a big question. AI, yeah, it could do. I think it needs probably to be controlled. I think it needs to be kept within within its boundaries. What those boundaries actually are, I suppose, will be decided by people who are very much younger than you and me, Doctor. I would imagine. I would imagine it probably will shape the way we think about things. I mean, if it takes away repetitive work in the same way that robots took away repetitive work all those years ago, it's all right. Will it rival Shakespeare and great literature? I doubt it very much indeed. I mean, you know, Musk and the rest of them can say what they like. I think they should get on with running their businesses, quite honestly. As far as Alibaba's concerned, the reason that is attracting a lot, I mean, we covered a lot of this yesterday, as you probably know. Yes, I think it probably means that China is beginning to realize that Alibaba and the other tech companies are where the growth is going to be. The interest in the United States is, one, because of that, and secondly, because it owns 33% of Ant, and as you know, the Ant IPO was postponed in 2020. It looks like now they're maybe just maybe moving towards another IPO, which would benefit large stock exchanges, particularly. I mean, if I were them, I'd be going for the United States again for an IPO, because that's apparently where the money is. As far as Binance is concerned, let's just remember what's actually been happening there. The company itself will throw its hands up and say, no, we're totally innocent. What was happening was disaffected employees were showing people, if you remember, and I did report on this, how people actually could go around a back door with false bank statements and false addresses and avoid the tech crackdown in China. Now, you can read that as you wish. Who's going to be prosecuted? The employees? Very possibly.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much indeed. Now, for business updates across the African continent, Ruchus Odiri joins us. Good morning, Ruchus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning to all our viewers. We begin with the Debt Management Office. There was a forum in Abuja. It was a one-day leadership and development policy dialogue series in collaboration with the African Center for Leadership Strategy and Development. They're calling on the new government to bring in more revenue in order to tackle Nigeria's debt deficits. And again, I just have to say, at the tail end of an outgoing administration, we are still talking about the need to grow revenue. So if the Debt Management Office is telling you that you need to grow revenue in order to manage your debts, then you know that there's an issue. So that was in Abuja. Also, to the Afri-Exim Bank, Benedict Orama, who is the president and chair of the board of directors of the African Export-Import Bank, proposed the creation of a domestic financial system that he says will not only allow Africa to participate effectively in the system, but also allow them to develop, prosper, and earn respect. And he was calling for this system to be able to finance what Africa needs in order to grow trade. Here he is, quote, saying, "It's therefore important that we build a domestic financial system that welcomes foreign banks, but that as a deliberate policy must have the strong participation of Africa-owned banks." That's all well and good, but I think African banks depend so much on external financing, especially if you want to grow your trade across the continent to match what we've got in Europe and North America. On the fiscal side, you just have to grow, and if you're going to grow, that still falls on government to be able to increase your skills, grow manufacturing, grow exports in order to grow your trade, in order to give these African banks the muscle that they need to be able to be more influential in financing a lot of these trade needs. We go to aviation. As you know, the airline operators of Nigeria are suing the federal government with respect to bringing in Ethiopian Air as a main partner for Nigeria Air. Adi Sirika at the forum last week said that it's going to take off before the administration hands over. So the judge there has ruled that there will be a ruling on April the 25th. So we'll find out the fate of Nigerian Air, whether that case can actually proceed. Once again, for our viewers, the airline operators of Nigeria are saying that they are worried about predatory pricing and unfair competition. Basically, the equivalent of the being crowded out if Nigeria Air is allowed to bring in Ethiopian Airlines as a partner for the national carrier to take off. They're also saying that why don't you make us, link us together and make us the national carrier? You can take some of our fleets and do that. But Hadi Sirika is absolutely hell-bent on this airline moving forward. Paper mills, an article in today's Business Day looking at the struggles of the paper mill industry. Again, we did it with the medical sector. We've talked about everything else, the revenues. Again, paper mills have become practically moribund. We've seen, I think, about 1.6 trillion naira in paper mill imports over the past 5 years. I don't know if we have the breakdown there, but essentially they've not been able to grow production. They've become very, very dependent. Yeah, okay, so there we go. So 1.6 trillion naira over the last 5 years. And if you look at the breakdown, I think it grew to its highest level in 2022 or so, if you look at the last 5 years of the breakdown. So, and then finally, Kamala Harris, she met with, okay, yeah, so here we go. So 2022, 412 billion, 2021, 328 billion. If you go back to those figures, basically that's how much that we've had to import, basically. So 228 billion 2021, 188 2020. It's just grown, pretty much each year. And then Kamala Harris was in Ghana. She met with female SMEs and announced, I think, about $1 billion in support across the continent for women-led SMEs and also SMEs in general. She's left Ghana. She's in beautiful Tanzania as we speak to talk to the business. Well, I think we have a tweet where she said she was proud to meet with these women-led SMEs and then announced that, yeah, there it is. So in my honor to meet with 6 extraordinary women entrepreneurs in Ghana to empower more women like them, I've announced $1 billion in public and private sector commitments across the continent of Africa. That's our updates.
I mean, so far you might call it what America is doing, but the sad reality is also the optics. The fact that we're having increasingly American leaders coming, but they're not touching base in Nigeria. Speaks volumes. I mean, we should look at it.
Ghana is facing
with all the problems Ghana is facing, they're still going to Ghana, but Nigeria, they're not touching base in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Speaks volumes. We should look at this critically, and that's why we should do a lot to improve our image. All right. Yeah, but good one on America, more money for female SMEs, because that's the way to go. Because when you look at most of the SMEs revolutionary rise in Africa, they're mostly female. Out of the over 40 million SMEs you've got in Nigeria, a big amount of them are females.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have been doing a lot of great work as regards. You remember, I think a couple of years ago in Biarritz in France, where some money was released, to SMEs. There was also the talk about the Batonga Foundation doing some work with Angelique Kidjo, to be able to get money and advocacy for SMEs, to be well funded. I remember the African Development Bank and things like that for SMEs. So I'm excited about that. And some banks too, kudos to Access Bank, they're doing a lot about, because when you look at it, the reason why a lot of female startups do not get that big push in the market is the fact that there's a financing gap between male-started and female-started SMEs. So I'm happy that this money will also help cushion effect, but a lot more can be done. As regards paper mill, it's just Nigeria happening to Nigeria, which is the sad reality. We had Newsprint in Owabokun. We had the paper mill company out of Jeba. We had many paper mill companies in there. I think 3 or 4 of them. Egypt has about 15 paper mill companies. We are the giant of Africa, the biggest economy here. We can't even produce paper. All of them all moribund. Most of this asset taken over by AMCON. Nothing is happening. Then we have to spend over 1.6 trillion on Forex to import. You know what that 1.6 trillion is?
It can go somewhere else.
It can go somewhere. Just imagine if this is plowed into education. The 1.6 trillion, you know how many jobs that have gone?
Right.
You know how many thousands of jobs? And that's the problem with Nigeria pervasively. Look at sugar. Look at all, before you start having, private individuals creating, this functionalities in our economy. Prior to this time, it used to be the case with cement until the likes of Dangote and Boa came to buffer it. When we had the cement Amanda in the 70s, we had to import a lot of cement in this country. That's why we need to fix industries. That's why we are talking about productivity. Yeah. Once productivity is restored, the economy starts to move. This is another side.
Described Kamala Harris' visit to Ghana, Zambia, and Tanzania as a charm offensive.
Yeah.
Following the interests of Russia, China, Japan in Africa, the United States has had to re-strategize to make sure that it deepens the links with its old allies in Africa and also tries to show up on the continent. Africa being, as we often argue, the last frontier. Now, the question is, how do African leaders take advantage of this renewed scramble for Africa? That's one question. But as for the Americans, yes, Anthony Blinken was in Ethiopia, he was in Niger. Thomas Greenfield, the UN ambassador to the United Nations, had also been, in Africa. Now it's the turn of Kamala Harris. Well, nations choose where to visit based on their strategic interests.
Indeed.
They are not coming to Nigeria at this time, maybe strategic. Nigeria is in transition. Why visit Nigeria? Why not wait for the new leader of Nigeria to emerge before you visit? So maybe when President Biden visits Africa, as he's likely to do, maybe Nigeria will be top of the list. I do not think that it is possible for any country, not even the United States, to just sidestep Nigeria like that. There's no way they can do it. It's not possible. So that's that about that. But supporting SMEs and all that, that's just promoting linkage, charm offensive, as I try to describe it. Now, the Debt Management Office, the big issue that I noticed in that workshop that you referred to, is that the spokesperson for the Department of Management of the Debt Management Office was saying, oh, Nigeria has the highest GDP in Africa. But if you look at GDP to revenue, we have the lowest.
Exactly.
And he made a recommendation. He said the thing to do is to increase revenue by raising taxes. And
Doctor, you don't like that.
And by punishing tax evaders.
Yes.
I don't have a problem with punishing tax evaders.
Yes.
Or tax, where tax avoidance is not a crime under the law. But if you evade tax, you have committed a crime. And he was saying, we have to tax people. Who is he going to tax?
Like you now,
These same Nigerians that are going to very soon be paying 750 naira per litre.
For fuel.
The intelligent thing to say is to expand the tax net, not to increase taxes and punish us further. As for the airline operators of Nigeria, the big issue here is that they're saying that they're not comfortable with the idea of the Nigeria Air.
Yes.
They think that is Sirika's personal project. They also think that the idea of putting Ethiopian Airline into the mix does not follow due process, and that it is a violation of the infrastructure concession program of Nigeria and the public procurement process. And that, in fact, Ethiopian Airline, imagine that the process that brought it into the mix was not even advertised.
Exactly.
So these are their issues. Plus also, the airline operators of Nigeria, that association, making arguments about BASA, Nigeria's bilateral air services agreement with many countries, particularly the United Kingdom, the US, and other, and their main concern is that don't hand over our BASA to a foreign airline, to Ethiopia. That's the issue to be determined. Will it now be possible for Hadi Sirika and the Ministry of Transportation to start Nigeria Air before May 29? That remains to be seen. Indeed. But the matter is in court, so we cannot go into the details until it is determined by the court.
Indeed.
Thank you.